Few imagine what really unfolds in hospice rooms when the final hours draw near. Beyond the medical charts and quiet routines, there are moments that defy explanation. Patients who can barely speak suddenly whisper names of people long gone. Eyes fixed on corners of the room follow something no one else can see. Hands reach upward as if greeting someone who has come to meet them. These are not scenes from a film, but real events witnessed again and again by hospice nurse Penny Smith. For nearly 2 decades, she has stood at the bedside of the dying, watching patterns repeat with startling precision. At first, she questioned them, but when the same phenomena appear in case after case, doubt becomes impossible. In this video, you will discover what truly happens when life is nearing its end, the signs that mark the approach of death, and why acceptance so often brings peace. The stories you will hear are not theories or doctrines, but first-hand accounts from a nurse who has seen what few are willing to talk about. They may challenge the way you think about death and change the way you live. In the final weeks and days, many patients describe a world that overlaps with ours and yet does not obey its rules. Penny Smith explains that deathbed visions are common. People close to the end often report seeing deceased relatives or friends, and sometimes even pets. This can happen weeks before death. At first, many can describe what they are seeing with surprising clarity. Later, when speech fades, the body continues to answer on its own. Eyes lift to the ceiling or to a specific corner of the room. Hands extend upward as if greeting someone. Mouths form names in a whisper. Even when no words come, the movements point to the same pattern. The person is interacting with something they perceive, and the expression on the face is more often calm than afraid. Penny has watched this unfold, hearing it from the room next to the nurse's station, and then going in, and in other cases, standing quietly at the bedside. One evening she heard a patient crying and calling to the corner of the room. He was reaching upward with tears running down his cheeks and repeating the name of his wife, Ingrid, who had died the year before. When Penny asked if it was his wife, he said it was. And when she asked if she was coming for him, he said yes, and added, "Tomorrow." He did not die the next day, but within a couple of days he was gone. The specific timing may have been off, yet the sense of being met, of someone coming for him, did not waver for him. To Penny, cases like this carry 2 constant features. The vision appears real to the patient, and the emotion attached to it is consoling, not distressing. Families sometimes misread these moments as confusion or psychiatric symptoms. Penny recalls a daughter who rang for help, worried her mother was hallucinating. Standing quietly for a minute, Penny saw the woman point upward, gesture repeatedly, and say names, first a sister who had died, then Mama and Daddy. The daughter confirmed that the names belonged to close relatives who had passed. Penny explained that this was deathbed visioning, a common experience near the end of life, and that it was clearly comforting to the patient. There was nothing to correct. The better course was to protect the peace of the moment rather than pull the person back to ordinary orientation. Again and again, she emphasizes that these scenes tend to bring ease, not fear. Children, Penny notes, often report seeing animals. She points to work by a physician who has interviewed hundreds of dying people, including pediatric cases, and observed that kids more often see pets than people, likely because fewer of their close human attachments have died. Penny says this matches what she has heard and seen. For an audience looking for a medical rule, this is not one. It is a consistent observation across many bedsides that helps families understand why a child might talk about a beloved animal as the end approaches. Not every report fits neatly. Penny has been asked what it means when a dying person sees someone who is still alive. She does not claim a firm answer, but offers a practical hypothesis based on family resemblance. Her own daughter looks strikingly like Penny's grandmother at the same age, so similar that, on a deathbed, seeing the grandmother might feel like seeing the daughter. In a case like that, the patient might say a living person's name, even though what they are perceiving is the face of someone who died long ago. Penny presents this simply as a way to make sense of a confusing detail without forcing a supernatural explanation or denying the patient's experience. Another recurring detail is timing. In earlier phases, A patient can talk about what they are seeing and name the people they believe are present. As death draws closer, communication may shut down, but Penny and her colleagues still see the same gestures: the reach toward the corner, the fixed gaze, the soft murmur of a familiar name. Families often ask whether their loved one is still having it. Penny's answer, based on these movements and expressions, is that many likely are. The body language keeps telling the story after speech is gone. The emotional tone of deathbed visions matters as much as the content. Penny repeatedly notes that these experiences tend to soothe. When a patient's face relaxes and the shoulders unclench at the mention of a deceased spouse, a parent, or a favorite animal, the goal of care becomes clear. Do not argue, do not interrupt, and do not insist on ordinary reality. If the vision reduces fear and brings comfort, let it stand. There was nothing to correct. The best course was to protect the peace of the moment and simply be present. In her experience, acknowledging the patient's reality in that moment is not indulging a delusion. It is providing the support that allows the person to meet the end with less anxiety. Penny does not attach doctrine to these scenes. She does not declare what the visions are or where they come from. She presents what she has witnessed many times over. Patients near death describe encounters with the dead. Their bodies and faces behave as if in conversation with someone just out of sight. Children often talk about pets, and families who first panic at hallucinations frequently settle when they see the calm such moments bring. The repetition across many unrelated cases is what persuaded her that she could not ignore it. For viewers who will one day sit at a bedside, these observations become practical knowledge. This is common, it usually helps, and your task is to protect the quiet and speak the words that matter. Deathbed visions are not the only pattern that returns in the final stretch. As the last days narrow into hours, other recurring behaviors appear: bursts of unexpected clarity, the language of travel, and the curious way people seem to wait for a specific moment to let go. Families often mistake the final stretch of life for a straight, predictable line. Penny Smith's bedside view suggests otherwise. In many cases, the end arrives with a surprising surge. A person who has been fading will rouse, open their eyes with intention, ask for a favorite food, or begin conversations that seemed out of reach the day before. Penny says this terminal lucidity appears in roughly 4 out of 10 dying people. It can happen even in advanced dementia, when a brief pocket of clarity returns just long enough for a few words that sound unmistakably like the old self. To the unprepared, it looks like recovery. In practice, it is part of the final approach. The body is closing its accounts, the person is gathering themselves for departure. For families, this is not a time for false hope, but a rare window to be present and to say what matters most. The details vary, but the shape repeats. Someone who has barely eaten for days asks for a small meal and tastes a familiar dish. Someone who has slept around the clock opens their eyes and tracks faces in the room. A quiet father speaks a sentence in his normal cadence and then returns to silence. Penny emphasizes that this change does not mean the illness has reversed. It is a final rise before the decline continues, and it can be deeply meaningful if relatives recognize it for what it is. This is when people manage a last call, accept a visitor they could not face before, or hear the answer to a question that has weighed on them. The act of naming love, gratitude, or forgiveness here is not magical thinking. It is practical care that fits the moment the body allows. Alongside this terminal lucidity is another pattern Penny hears again and again: the language of travel. As the end nears, many patients begin to talk as if a trip is imminent. They say they need to pack. They ask about tickets. They mention a train that is coming, a truck they are driving, a schedule that must be kept. To an outsider, it can sound like confusion. To Penny, it is one more way the mind prepares for leaving. The metaphors are ordinary, drawn from a lifetime of departures and arrivals. If a person spent years on the road, the phrases fit that life. If they commuted by rail, a train becomes the natural image. Staff typically avoid arguing with these statements if they bring comfort. When families see it this way, they understand that the task is not to drag the person back into ordinary orientation, but to let the journey language carry the weight it needs to carry. A third recurring sign is the tendency to wait. Penny has seen people hold on until a sun flies in, until a friend finally reaches the bedside, or until they hear something they needed to hear. Just as often, the reverse happens. The room fills with well-meaning relatives, and the person does not die until everyone steps out for coffee or sleep. It is not abandonment. It is a pattern seen so often it no longer looks like chance. The person appears to choose a moment that belongs to them, whether that moment is a clasped hand or an empty doorway. Knowing these patterns changes what good support looks like. Penny's advice is spare and workable. Be there, but do not overwhelm. Let silence do part of the job. And when the body grants a clear moment, use it for words that will not be regretted later. She has stood through scenes where a relative tries to pull the person back into calendars and obligations. It never helps. What helps is a few sentences that name the truth with kindness. What the person means to you, that you will be all right, that they do not need to struggle to meet anyone's expectations. When terminal lucidity arrives, do not mistake it for reversal. Receive it as the last opening for connection. These signs often appear alongside deathbed visions, but they do not depend on them. A patient may never report seeing a deceased relative and still show the travel talk, terminal lucidity, and the careful timing. Or they may have frequent visions and yet remain physically unchanged until the final hours. Penny avoids forcing one into the meaning of the other. She keeps returning to what repeats across many unrelated cases. The end has its own choreography that the living can learn to recognize. There is also the matter of pace. After the brief surge, decline tends to resume, sometimes quickly. Speech recedes, eyes wander, and the body returns to its small, economical movements. Families who understood the surge as the last opening are less shaken when it passes. They used it for presence rather than plans. The room grows quieter, and the person appears to drift between here and somewhere else. Penny often hears relatives say, "It felt like they weren't fully with us anymore." And she recognizes the description. The lift is over, the journey talk slows, attention turns to comfort. None of this requires a theory. It requires observation and a willingness to respond to what is actually happening, not to what television taught us to expect. Penny's years on night shifts and day shifts have shown her that the same motifs recur in different hospitals, homes, and hospice centers. The patterns are not rigid rules, but they show up often enough to guide care. If you recognize terminal lucidity, you will not waste it on denial. If you hear travel language, you will not argue the itinerary. If you sense a person waiting, you will ask gently what or whom they might be waiting for. And you may notice that the moment comes when the room is quiet and private. Sometimes these end-of-life experiences seem to extend beyond the patient's bed and brush those who love them. Penny has one such story of her own, and in the next part we will follow it, not as an explanation, but as another observation from a nurse who has learned to notice what happens when a life is about to cross a threshold. Penny's account of what touched her own family begins quietly, on a night when her father was in the hospital and she was resting at his home. She lay on the hospital bed set up in the lower level, staring at a ceiling beam crowded with her father's hats. The detail seized her attention in a way that felt odd. She could not stop noticing how many hats were hanging there. The phone rang. A nurse said she should come. Penny gathered her brother and mother and headed to the car. On the drive, the nurse called again to say that her father had died. Later, because the nurse knew Penny was a hospice nurse, she described what had happened in the room. She had given medication for breathing. He said he was about ready to hang it up. She stepped out briefly to get another dose, and when she returned, he was taking his final breaths. For Penny, the link between her fixation on the hats and her father's remark was immediate and unmistakable. She understood this as a shared death experience, something she had hardly heard about before becoming active on social media. And she leaves it at that, a paired moment across two places that marked the time of his passing. About 3 weeks later came an event that, in her words, sealed her conviction that something continues after death. She was asleep when she became aware of her father as warmth and intense light, a presence that felt vividly real, not like a dream. There was a sense of energy, bright and orange, and an exchange of love that was simple and direct. She responded aloud in her sleep. When she awoke, she realized her husband had his arms around her and was answering back with the same words of affection. One small detail stuck out to both of them. A term of endearment neither her father nor her husband normally used slipped into the moment, as if the conversation had briefly crossed through both of them. Penny does not try to explain how such a thing occurs. She only insists on how unmistakable it felt. Her sister later described a series of meditations during a harsh season of life. Her adult daughter was in the grip of addiction, and practical decisions had to be made. Ending financial support, taking emergency custody of a granddaughter, setting boundaries that were painful and urgent. In those meditations, the sister repeatedly found herself in front of a bench where their father sat with a dark figure beside him. The message was always steady. She already knew what needed to be done. She had to do it. The encounters became a turning point. With each session, the father's image grew more transparent while the dark figure remained. Eventually, only that shape was left, and then it too was gone. The family's story adds its own coda. The niece is now clean and sober and has been for years, and the crisis that pressed on their sister has long since passed. Penny's mother took longer to speak about anything unusual, and when she did, she tried not to attach meaning to it. She mentioned small wisps, brief sensory touches, and a familiar voice warning her to be careful while she worked in the yard. Asked what she thought of that, she insisted she did not believe in an afterlife. Months later, she admitted the wisps had grown less frequent but still would not make a doctrinal claim about what they were. Penny pressed gently. What did she think they were, if not signs of something beyond? The mother conceded that she thought they were the dead, then retreated from labels. Penny leaves the paradox as it is, a woman who does not profess belief, but who acknowledges experiences that sound exactly like continued contact. Her brother, an atheist, has never reported anything similar, and Penny notes without judgment that openness may matter. She suspects that people who are willing to notice such things are more likely to recognize them when they happen. She applies the same logic to her own patients. Relatives often ask whether the dying come back to visit the nurse who cared for them. In her case, the answer is no. She does not expect it. She was a professional at the bedside, not a family member. She says only her father returned to her in a way she could not dismiss, and that was enough. None of these episodes are presented as proof in a scientific sense. Penny does not frame them as a doctrine and does not tell her audience what to believe. She offers them as plain accounts from her life, a paired signal at the hour of death, an overwhelming post-mortem encounter that did not feel like sleep, meditative scenes that gave her sister the strength to act, and small warnings that reached her mother while gardening tools were in hand. For Penny, taken together with nearly 2 decades of hospice work, these moments ended the torment she once felt about mortality. She still does not subscribe to specific pictures of heaven or hell. She only says that after what she has seen and lived through, she is convinced something lies beyond this world. The stories of shared experience and after-death contact raise inevitable questions, and Penny resists answering more than she knows. She leaves viewers with the texture of what happened and moves on to the part of her work that is most teachable: the physical procession toward death. In the next section, we will follow that path as she has observed it, without myths, without cinematic tropes, and with the practical details that help families support a peaceful end. Dying does not unfold as a single dramatic scene. In hospice, it is a process with patterns that repeat so reliably that families can learn to recognize them. Penny Smith describes a road that becomes clearer once you know the landmarks. Weeks before the end, the body turns inward. People sleep longer and more deeply. Appetite fades and meals shrink to a few bites or sips. Conversation grows brief, not because love is absent, but because energy is scarce. Many become a little withdrawn from those around them. As the days contract, physical changes show where the process is headed. Circulation shifts, hands and feet grow cool and may change color. Swallowing becomes difficult, and feeding loses its importance next to comfort. Families often struggle here, but Penny emphasizes that declining appetite and difficulty swallowing are part of the natural course. In this stretch, people may start the small, repetitive actions nurses know well: picking at clothing or sheets, rubbing a hem between the fingers, reaching upward, and for some, brief vision-like moments, signs of the transitioning phase that usually spans weeks to days. Closer to the end, responsiveness fades. A patient's eyes may be open or partly open without tracking faces. The jaw loosens, the mouth often hangs open. Sometimes the neck settles back into a bit of extension that looks odd, but is common. Speech disappears. When wakefulness returns for a moment, the person seems to drift between here and somewhere else, present in the room and away from it at the same time. Breathing becomes the clearest sign that the body is finishing its work. Patterns can shift from hour to hour, fast to slow, shallow to deep, with long pauses between breaths. Another sound arrives near the end that families rarely forget. Because the person can no longer swallow effectively, saliva collects in the airway and vibrates as air moves across it, making a wet rattling or gurgling noise, often called the death rattle. Penny prepares families for it and explains that it is a mechanical effect of accumulated saliva and relaxed muscles. In her experience, many people die within roughly 48 hours after this noise begins. Fever can appear, the skin can feel sweaty and clammy, and the person simply grows quieter. The unresponsive period at the very end can be brief or surprisingly long. Penny has seen it last minutes, hours, days, and sometimes a week or two. There is no clock to set. She also shares a description that fits what she has watched. The physical side of dying and the spiritual or emotional side have to meet before death can occur. When one is ready and the other is not, the person lingers. So someone who appears physically near the end may remain for days, while another may die sooner than expected. Not every death is peaceful without help. A portion of patients develop terminal agitation driven by existential suffering, restlessness, fear, or distress that reassurance alone cannot ease. In those cases, the team may use medication to provide sedation until death, allowing the person to remain comfortable. The aim is not to hasten the end, but to remove suffering when nothing else works. Penny has also seen the opposite outcome. A person who struggled right up to the edge suddenly looks upward, and peace washes over the face at the moment of death. Families often arrive with expectations borrowed from movies: a final, eloquent sentence, eyes closing neatly on cue, a tidy farewell. Penny's work teaches a different truth. Most people do not deliver famous last words. They stop speaking hours or days before the end, breathe in irregular rhythms, and simply cease when the body is finished. The face may be slack, the eyes partly open, the mouth ajar. This can be hard to witness if you expect a scripted ending. It is easier when you understand that these signs are normal in a natural death. What helps most at the bedside is simple presence, holding space without feeling obliged to talk. Say what matters if you feel moved to, as Penny once suggested to a mother at her son's bedside, but it is also okay to be quiet. People near the end may talk about traveling or wait for someone to arrive, or slip away when the room is empty. These patterns are common. When breathing changes, notice the pattern and keep attention on comfort. If a brief lift of energy appears near the end, terminal lucidity, families often get a short chance to visit or share a few words. If agitation rises, accept medical help to keep the person comfortable. This is the ordinary shape of dying as Penny has observed it: a narrowing of appetite and attention, a turn inward, a body that breathes in changing rhythms, a mind that is here and elsewhere by turns, and finally, a letting go. Understanding this map does not remove loss, but it does take away some fear. With that fear lowered, one last question remains: what, in Penny's experience, truly helps the living carry on and the dying meet the end with peace? What Penny's years at the bedside make unmistakable is simple and practical. Acceptance is the doorway to a peaceful death. People are often sad and frightened when they first hear that time is short. That reaction is normal. In her experience, most arrive at acceptance by the end, and when they do, the dying is calmer. When acceptance does not come and the distress is existential, restlessness can surge into terminal agitation that reassurance cannot settle. In those cases, the team may use medication so the person can remain comfortable until the end. None of this is theory. It is the pattern she has seen repeat across many rooms. For families, the most helpful act is presence, not performance. You do not have to fix the moment with speeches. Hold the space and shape the environment to the person's preferences. Sometimes quiet, sometimes their favorite music, and let silence do some of the work. When the body offers a clear moment through a brief lift of energy or a few lucid words, many use it for what truly matters: love and gratitude. Penny tells of a young man named Brandon whose mother, after struggling to know what to do, finally spoke from the heart about what he meant to her and how she had recognized strength in him from the start. He took his last breath soon after. The point is not that words cause death. It is that speaking from the heart can help both people find peace. Learning what is normal also dissolves fear. Irregular breathing, long pauses, open eyes that do not track, the wet rattle of pooled saliva, these are expected signs, not emergencies. Don't try to correct travel language or visions. Acknowledging them often steadies the room. If a person seems to be waiting for someone or something, honor that possibility. Step in when asked, step out when needed. Viewers can trust Penny's guidance because it is grounded in repetition, not doctrine. After nearly 2 decades, she does not claim to know the architecture of an afterlife. She reports what she has witnessed and what has helped. Personally, the work and her own family experiences ended the death anxiety she carried for years and left her convinced that something continues beyond this world, without subscribing to fixed pictures of heaven or hell. The takeaway is both humble and strong. Accept that death is part of life, be present, say what matters, and much of the fear loses its hold. For the dying and for those who love them. Dear friends, do you believe in life after death? Share your thoughts in the comments. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like and don't forget to subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. By doing so, you'll be supporting my channel, which truly needs your help. Thank you for watching, and see you soon.